Thank you so much for tuning in to Charge a Chat here on Channel 26, and for those who are online, thank you for joining us. Today we have Chris Ingalls. He is on King 5 as a news reporter investigator, and I'm your host Emily.
And I'm Amelia.
And thank you, So, how
Hey,
are
guys.
you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Good.
We appreciate having you here.
Yeah.
So what kind of sparked your curiosity as a child with kind of like maybe investigating or just wanting to look deeper into things?
You mean like tearing apart the toaster and that kind of thing? Just probing around? Yeah. You know, I was a kid with a pretty wild imagination. You know, I was always the kid who was in the movie or the hero or the football star or that kind of stuff. And you know, I was a very quiet kind of kid in class. I was not an outspoken sort of kid, sat in the back of the classroom, never put my hand up or anything like that. But I did have a pretty active imagination. I was always sort of daydreaming and imagining things. And that's probably the curiosity that you're talking about, you know, just the fact that you wonder about things and you pretend things in your mind, and that can help. That's a good thing, you know, that can help develop into a good investigative reporter.
Oh yeah. Speaking of pretending and stuff, like, did you ever pretend to be a detective in those kind of situations?
Yeah, I mean, like everybody, I guess I watched a lot of police shows, and I always thought that was pretty cool. You know, and the work and the detective work is really part of what we do now, in a sense. I mean, I hold a police detective in very high regard. I mean, that's a life and death job, right? And we're not always in these life and death sort of things, but it's the same kind of thing where you're trying to piece together the facts and understand things that sometimes people don't really want you to know. And so, that's what you have to do. You have to be a detective.
Is there like kind of a way like you learn to sort of like get information out of people a different way? Like you kind of like, how did you develop your skills and kind of like the interviewing process or so?
Yeah, that's a great question, Amelia, because a lot of people will say, oh, I want to be an investigative reporter, right? That sounds cool. Well, the thing that you need to be first is a basic reporter. I mean, the basic part of reporting is going out and learning the facts of the story, right? The who, what, where, when, why, how. And then turning around and telling people that, writing it in a story that's kind of interesting and engaging. So you need to get that part down first, which is just the basics of reporting. In the TV business, we would call it daily news reporting. You show up at King 5 at 9 o'clock and there's a morning meeting. And you might pitch a story to the bosses, or they might have one in the newspaper, or that they got through a press release. And you're going to take that story at 9:30 and you're going to have it ready for TV at 5 o'clock that night, right? And that's daily news reporting. So you really have to get that quick turn kind of reporting down first, and then you start to develop into an investigative reporter, which is a little bit deeper. That's where we're trying to find something that isn't so obvious now, right? We're trying to dig for something that people may not want you to see, or you're connecting the dots for something. And an investigative reporter is really unearthing something that's not so obvious.
Can you give us an example of something that you maybe have pitched to them at all?
Yeah, so I'll tell you about the story that I'm working on right now. If you want to hear about an investigative story.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm working on a series of investigative stories right now about a alcohol and drug treatment clinic. It was about a clinic in Tacoma, Washington, where the drug counselors, licensed drug counselors, were supposedly taking bribes from clients. And the reason that they were doing that is these clients had been sent into drug treatment by the court system, right? So they had to do this. Instead of going to jail, they got drug treatment. What the offenders were doing was paying the counselors to say that they were in drug treatment. And the drug counselors would send in a report to the court saying, this guy's doing great, he's in drug treatment. And and he wasn't.
Yeah.
He was out probably still using drugs, right?
Yeah.
So that was, that was an example of a story where it came to me from a law firm that called and said, hey, I think this is going on. Can you guys look into this? And we had to start, surveilling this place, watching it, trying to figure out what was going on there. Are there people that would admit to us what they were doing?
Yeah.
And it took 6 months to get that story on TV. And that's a lot of work, a lot of time that a daily news reporter wouldn't have to devote to that kind of thing.
Yeah. Would you say it's difficult to come up with ideas and pitches and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, for a good one, it can be. I mean, you'll review hundreds of viewer tips. I mean, you could call King 5 today with the next story that's on the news tonight. That's one of our primary sources of information. Is this law firm called me because they knew it would take an investigative reporter, and they sent an email to the King 5 investigators, investigators at king5.com, and so then we went to work on it, and so but that was one of, I mean, there's hundreds of emails that come in that just aren't a story. But you do have to go through a lot of them and try to decide what's something where we think there's potential that will investigate it, dig something up, and then at the end of that, we'll actually have a story at the end of it. Because you can do a lot of work on things that don't pan out, and that's part of what we do. You want to pick something that you think is going to work.
Yeah.
So you mentioned like a law firm called you. Like, what other kind of connections do you have that you kind of scope out for resources and stories?
Sure. Well, I put a story on Wednesday that came from a guy who he just retired as a terrorism investigator, and he had a story that he thought was a problem, that the federal government wasn't being aggressive enough in this one particular area of terrorism watch area that he was in. So tips can come from sources you work. I work a federal criminal justice beat. That's how I knew this particular guy. That's the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office, federal court system, which is a very difficult beat because they don't talk to reporters for one thing, and they don't allow cameras into the federal courthouse. So, so I'm connected by beats. I'm connected by tips that come in, and just doing research on things, putting out public records requests and seeing what comes back on them.
Yeah, that sounds very fascinating.
Yeah, but again, I want to say that there's not many, in answer to your original question, Amelia, there's not a lot of, you get some bites, you start developing it, but you look at a lot of stuff and only actually a little bit of it ends up on TV.
Yeah. That sounds a little stressful when you go through all of this work and then just a tiny bit goes on.
Yeah, well, it's tough when you work on something for months and then you realize it's not there. This wasn't what we thought it was. And that can happen. And you know what? You don't force something on TV. You put something on TV because it's the right thing to do. Doesn't matter how much work you've done. Does it belong on TV? The people deserve to know about it.
So even like stories that maybe haven't panned out because if you put months into research into it, would you say that there's any stories that like you wish you maybe investigated differently, that you think you could have gone about a different way, that maybe could have made it?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a specific example, but definitely. And sometimes you go back and you look at an old story and you're like, wow, I wish I would have said that a little more clearly or a little better. And you're always second guessing it, but you always hope you learn from those kind of things, right? And that the next story will be a little better because you'll learn from that. And that's what you guys are doing, right? You edit it together and you look at it, and you should go back and look at some of your old stuff and then kind of evaluate yourself. Yeah.
What would you say is one of your favorite stories you've done?
I'm not talking about investigative stories, but just I remember a story I did probably 10 years ago now, where they put us in these big wetsuits, the Coast Guard did, and they had these things called motor lifeboats. And off the coast of Washington, there's the Coast Guard Motor Lifeboat School. It's these maybe 30 or 40 foot motorized lifeboats, and the Coast Guard goes out and trains. And it was really cool to be on the water, getting paid for this. Right, and you're riding these waves with these guys that are really experienced in these boats. It was just a fun day, it was just a plain fun day. And there was another day that the U.S. Border Patrol wanted to show off some of their aircraft that they fly over the border to keep, to make sure that the border's protected. And we got to go up and fly with them, and I remember the guy handing me the controls and flying over Canada, and that kind of stuff was fun. Now that's not every day of work, but those are the kind of days that stick out because you're like, hey, this is a good job to have.
Yeah.
This is fun.
Now, this is all extremely fascinating, but we have to take our first break.
Yeah.
So stay tuned, everybody, and enjoy our own version of a news report.
Good morning, and welcome to your daily morning news. I'm Walter Robindinger, and I'm here with my lovely co-host.
And I'm Kashia Nerwa. I must say,
Well,
you're looking really
Why, thank you.
professional
It is
today.
a very nice
We
tie.
don't always have to look professional.
I actually recently got it. That's enough coffee talk for now. Right now, we're going to move into our first news segment of the day. We have a very interesting mystery going on locally. And
It's actually global.
is it not just
Yes,
locally?
I believe it's been going on for
a
great
global
years.
phenomenon that seems to be happening more and more
We've only just
frequently.
now noticed it.
Cats have getting stuck in trees. Yes, and
For
now
this, we turn to our resident cat expert,
yes,
Gerald.
Gerald, what have you to say about this?
Good morning, Walter and Kashia. Now, I'm Gerald. You may know me. I live down on 60th next to the elm tree. And this is Lucia, my coworker. We've been studying cats for over 20 years now, and let me tell you that this is a very interesting phenomenon. Now, cats, you'll see in the wild, generally stay in trees a lot, but generally they can get back down again. I wonder if I have any cats stuck in my elm tree. There's a lot of cats here. Back to you, Walter. Well, thank you, Gerald. Now, if you want more information about this catastrophe, you can get a hold of Gerald. He lives by the elm tree down on 60th.
And now we turn to Steven Stevens, our weatherman, to find out if it will rain. Good morning, Walter. My name is Steven Stevens, and here I'm bringing you the weather. Today is Thursday. Now, it's going to be raining cats and dogs, so you better watch out for those excess poodles. Thanks, Steven. We have now some breaking news from down in the parking lot. What appears that someone has stolen old woman Margaret's parking space. I'm Theodore Todd, coming to you live from the parking lot with old lady Margaret. Now, Margaret, what can you tell us about what happened here today?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I was just gonna go park in my parking lot like I normally do, and she was gone, and
Well, this seems like a national tragedy, honestly. It's just such a shame that some young man or lady would,
would steal a parking spot from someone like me. I don't even know. I can't handle this.
yeah, well, back to you, Walter Robindinger, about this national tragedy. Yes. Well, we're very sorry for your loss there, Margaret. Truly a national tragedy. Truly. But now we have to move on from that story and head over to Steve with traffic. Well, thank you, Walter. I'm Chris, and here for traffic. Careful, there's a little bit of...
Welcome back, Marysville. We're here with Chris Ingalls from King 5 News, an investigative reporter. This is Charger Chat, a student-run talk show for those of you who are just joining us. You were just talking earlier about your kind of day-to-day, or your highlights of your job. But how did you start getting into news career? What was your first steps into that?
Yeah, I went to college. By the way, great program here. I love the fact that you guys are doing this, and you got the lab to do it, the equipment. I wasn't doing anything like this till I got to college. And to get your feet wet, to get in front of the camera, behind the camera, is so key. And I was very lucky when I got to college. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I thought I'd start writing stories for a newspaper, right? Because my dad had been a newspaper reporter for a while. I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. Let's do that. I can't do math, social studies, history. Was blowing all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I could write a little bit. And so then I was in news writing classes, and I got into the little radio station on campus and started doing horribly a little show, right? It was terrible. I mean, it was really bad, but it was a learning experience. It was 5 watts of radio at Wright State University, and you had to rip a story off the news wires, they call it, kind of rewrite it, and then turn around and do a little newscast. And you could not listen to it. It was just terrible.
Oh, gosh.
But the thing was, it was a stepping stone, right? And that got me into an overnight job at the local radio station that nobody else wanted to do, that was actually a paid job, while I was still in school. So every night at 11 p.m., or a couple nights a week, I'm going into this radio station, actually reporting the news. And that's really where I learned it, right? I mean, this is a job that you learn on the job. When you get that first job, that's when you really start learning. So, and then with a little while in radio, I became a police beat reporter in radio, and the company owned a TV station also, and I just jumped over to the TV side of things.
Yeah, I definitely understand like the feeling of like the kind of cringy like first shows that you do.
You cannot get on the microphone, do horribly, and say, "Oh, I'm never going to be able to do this." You just can't do that. You need to that you learn whether you can do it by getting the experience of doing it.
It's like riding a bike. You have to fall in order to know how to stay on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. For people who are just starting out and want to be a big news reporter like yourself and stuff, where would you suggest them trying out first?
I think you need to find a place where you can get some real world experience. I mean, this is a job, there's things to learn about broadcast theory, and that's all important stuff, but you know, getting in front of the mic or getting in there in front of the video switcher, learning how to work that camera right there, that is the stuff that's so important for this job. So, you know, I don't want to call out schools necessarily, but Wazoo is well known for their journalism program. They got the Edward Murrow, you know, connections. UW has communications programs that are good. And then, you know, if there's what I did was, after I did my little thing at Wright State University and their little radio station, I looked around at other radio stations, said, where else can I go? And public radio was nearby. And they said, we're just dying to fill some time. And so they gave me a half-hour show where I was cutting tape and putting a show together. So you can look for those things. And they're looking for young, enthused people who will work.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that you started with radio and then you kind of started going on TV. So how did your schedule change from like going to like daily news reporting to more investigative reporting? Like, what does your day-to-day life look like?
Yeah, so I had a lot of years in as a beat reporter, daily reporter, right, which is producing a story every day. And as a beat reporter, that's a guy, like, you go to the police station and you try to find out what's going on today with the police department, or you're a city hall reporter, what's government doing. You're building stories from the ground up in that respect, right? Because you're not taking a newspaper article and then just trying to make that into a story for TV. Hey, the newspaper interviewed this guy, I'm going to go find this guy and I'm going to interview him, then I'll do the same story. Beat reporting is you are finding the story, right? You go to City Hall, you hear that the mayor has some kind of plan to raise people's taxes, and then you're going to start developing that information so that you got it locked down so you can put that on TV. That's beat reporting. Beat reporters make good investigative story reporters because we're doing the same thing. And so 10 years ago, really, the company started sort of working me into an investigative reporter off of the federal beat, which I'd worked fairly successfully. And so, you know, I've probably been doing the investigative reporting for 10 years, and it was a challenge because it's a whole new sort of thing. You know? For investigative reporters, you've got to go a little deeper. You've got to dig into that stuff and make something, you know, and put a story together that's not an obvious thing to get. You know.
Would you say being an investigative reporter is not a job for everyone?
You know, it can be very boring. It's a lot of, you know, you go from being a daily reporter where you're out in the field every day, running around, to sitting at a desk, going through paperwork, making phone calls. You know, I spent Friday going through 500 pages for the second or third time because I'm looking for one page in there that was very important to my story. And so that's what you have to do. You know? Somebody said, hey, there's this thing's in here, you got to find it. And so I had to go through it again, you know, and I never did find it.
Well, I admire you for the try of that. If I saw 500 pages, I'd be really intimidated.
Yeah, but it's also exciting because when you do find the thing you're looking for, that's pretty cool.
So how do you kind of juggle like multiple stories at once? Because I'm sure you can't just do one at a time because it takes so much investment into each one.
Yeah, you're always trying to nurture stories, several of them at once. Because remember, there's a good percentage of them that won't pan out. So you juggle them by just trying to keep organized and checking in with people again. You know, you might check in with somebody and talk to somebody, and then a week later they might remember something they didn't, so you might have to call them back. Little things like that that you're doing to keep the story, keep stories moving along. You're keeping them in development.
Definitely. So now I want to ask about roadblocks that you have in your career.
Yeah.
What would you say is one of the most challenging parts of being an investigative reporter? Do you hit any dead ends with a lot of things, which I'm pretty sure you do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's I'm very fortunate to work for King 5, which our company has made a commitment to investigative reporting. So the roadblocks and challenges are that this is the most expensive kind of journalism you can do, because you're putting a guy in a back room who's not putting something on TV every day, right?
Yeah.
You're paying that guy to work in the back room, and then every now and then he comes out and he puts a story on TV. Your product is the stuff that goes on TV. So if you think of it as a business, you deliver your product when a story shows up on TV.
Yeah.
So all those reporters that are out there putting a story on TV every day, that's making you money as a business.
Yeah.
The investigative reporter's not making you as much money. So the challenge to investigative reporting is to keep it alive. Because there's a lot of companies that just don't do it. I mean, there's a lot of media companies that just do not do it. Or they do what I call faux investigations, where they pretend it's an investigation, they call it an investigation, but they're really not digging anything up.
It's just more beat reporting.
Yeah, it's just you know, we found this or we got that, and it's not something that's really that deep or meaningful. So our challenge is just, it's always making sure that we're producing good material, meaningful stuff, so that will continue to be funded by the people that pay the bills.
Do you have any quirks of keeping the show alive? Because I know, or I shouldn't say show, but the investigation itself. Because you were saying how you got to make sure that it's not boring or whatever.
Yeah.
And do you have any natural ways that you maybe make the show more alive and fluffy, as I say?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, storytelling is, and I'm not very good at it, honestly. I mean, I've always had to kind of rely on the facts of a good story, not because there ain't no great reporter here, right? I mean, there's reporters that are great storytellers that can take a pretty mundane thing and make it very interesting.
Yeah.
I can't really do that. I mean, I need a pretty good story to help me.
Yeah.
You know, and it's always better when you're telling a good story. But in the world that you're in right now, you guys have to think visually, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you got the TV, if you've got a camera that you're working with, what people are absorbing is what they see, right? So if I just put document after document after document after document, I'm going to lose people that way, you know. And so we do have to find a way to visualize. That's the way that we always try to think of this, you know. What's that document represent, and how do I go visualize that? So if the mayor's raising taxes, you know, who's going to get hit by that tax, and where do I go find that person, and what's their story out in the real world? You know, and that's how you try to visualize a TV story.
Absolutely. So you're trying to find ways to get people connected and make people feel like it affects them.
Yeah. It's not some highbrow people up in the city hall. It's about what are the people that it affects out in the real world.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Now, would you say that there's a lot of conspiracies out there?
No.
No, well,
I know. Everybody think, you know, a lot of times people think there's a conspiracy and there's something going on, and they're just wrong. I mean, we all kind of jump to that. You know, I understand why we do it. It's sort of human nature. But you know, most government is people trying to do their jobs well. Most police officers are people trying to uphold the law. Most, you know, the systems that we look at in the investigative unit, we try to look at a big, large, you know, the big, larger picture. You don't find a lot of conspiracies out there. But when you do, it is important to find them, because they're very damaging. And that's why we're here, right? So when you do find one, it's a pretty amazing thing, because it's people trying to cover things up usually. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here in our show, we actually have a story about conspiracies.
Okay, yeah.
So stay tuned, Marysville. We will be right back. So enjoy a conspiracy.
Welcome to Conspiracy Meeting. Everyone, put your glasses on. Let us all introduce each other. My name is Emily. I conspire against the government of the global warming, thinking that it takes over the animals.
Hi, my name is Matilda, but I go by Tilly, and I'm here today to talk about aliens. They're real and they're sad because we're hiding them.
Hi, I'm Timothy. I believe in the conspiracy that U.S. senators are being held underground in a secret building by the government, sending out clones as their replacement.
Well, the meeting hasn't started yet, so let us just mingle together and get to know each other.
Jonathan loves to mingle.
Love to mingle, and you know what rhymes with mingle? Pringle. And you know who loves Pringles? Aliens.
I was going to say that I believe the aliens came down here and are working with the government so that way they can take my U.S. senators.
Are you an alien?
And the aliens are always everywhere. The clones take care of the aliens, and the aliens take care of global warming.
I think you're right. I do think that the aliens are getting involved, and I think that they are harming us as a country.
You know, I just don't understand why everybody's hating on the aliens. You know what the aliens are doing right now? Blocking out the haters.
Maybe we should call it a day for today, because we're all heated. And you know what's heated? Global warming. You know what's heated? Aliens.
You know, it's even the cloning device that makes out the U.S. senators that you see today.
Well,
Really out.
I'll see y'all later.
Bye.
Welcome back, Marysville. Thank you again for joining us on Charger Chat. We have Chris Ingalls, the investigative reporter on King 5. I'm Emily, in case you're just joining in, and this is...
I'm Amelia.
Hi. And since you may or may not just be joining in on us right now, we are Charger Chat, a live show that us students here at Marysville Getchell produce, interviewing very interesting people. So,
What happened today? What went wrong today?
no, nothing.
Oh.
You're pretty great. Now I want to ask you about deadlines.
Yeah.
What are issues that you have with deadlines, if you have any?
Yeah, the issue is they're everything. I mean, this is a business where if you're 3 seconds late, everybody knows it, right?
Oh,
That 3 long seconds when they toss to somebody and they're not there.
Yeah.
So deadlines are huge.
Oh,
and you
yeah.
have to be able to meet them. I mean, they're the immovable object that's part of every day. And in the news business today on television, where I think we put on like 11 hours of news on King 5 a day. So there's always deadlines, you know. And,
Oh, I believe
and when you're working for the Daily News, there's the 4 o'clock show, the 5 o'clock show, you know, there's the 6:30 show. So there's a lot of deadlines during the day, and if you miss them, you won't be employed for long.
Yeah, that sounds so devastating. I'm sorry for my slip up right there.
It is devastating because it's bad for the show. It's bad for us. It makes the whole station look bad if you're not meeting your deadlines. That's why they're so important.
Have you ever missed a deadline?
Yeah, I have. Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
do tell.
I have, and you know, sometimes I feel like it's my fault, and sometimes it's technical problems.
Yeah.
But it's still a deadline missed, and that's a strike against you.
How many strikes do you have before any penalties come to you?
Well, I think that's always the boss is looking at the total picture. But when you talk about a screw up that really goes against you, missing a deadline is one of them. So I wouldn't say there's a particular number, but you know, that's one that really gets noticed.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned like, yeah, you have to invest a lot of time in it. You don't always be able to produce a show ready for television like as consistent of a schedule as like a beat reporter.
Right.
But you've definitely like had it pay off with like awards and stuff. So how is it like winning like your first being recognized for your first story on like a national level?
I mean, it's cool. You know, so the investigative unit, we won the, you know, stories that I've done have won a national Emmy for investigative reporting and a Peabody Award for our investigative reporting, and that's really nice because that means that they've looked at all across the country, right? Awards from all across the country. So it's fun when they pick your story out of all of those.
Yeah. And you said Peabody Award. I'm not quite familiar with what that is, and I'm sure that there's some viewers out there that aren't familiar.
Yeah.
Could you explain to us what a Peabody Award is?
Yeah, Peabody Award is just a long-time television award where they recognize the best in television entertainment and you know, news and information, documentaries, and so they hand out maybe 30 so awards each year, and every now and then they throw one to a local television station, and they did for some stories that we did. So, you know, we won with Stephen Colbert, who was doing his show, which was great. Game of Thrones was there. Portlandia, you know, it's all these people in the room that you feel kind of cool because you're with them, even though you know you're not on that level. Yeah, it was fun.
So that kind of prestige, like, I'm sure it's like giving you a little bit more credibility. Maybe has it made your job any easier having that status, or?
You know, every story it still takes the same amount of work to make a good story. So I mean, it is nice to have that because people know you're serious about investigative reporting.
How many awards have you won?
I think I've won a half dozen local Emmys, and those are investigative reporting Emmys. You know, there's many different categories for Emmys. Our unit, of course, tries to win the investigative Emmys. And then that National Peabody, a Sigma Delta Chi Award, which is an award by the journalism fraternity, and then a national Emmy.
This is all very fascinating, but unfortunately we're almost out of time. Is there any last things that you wanted to say to the community or about?
Well, you know, thank you so much for coming, and I'm really proud of the school for doing this. I just think it's great that you guys are doing this. I think that the earlier you can sink your teeth into this, the better your chances are that you're going to make it out there in the real world. So good luck to you guys.
Thank you so much.
And then how can people find you? In the future.
Sure. So we're on the King 5 Investigators page at www.king5.com, and you can click on an Investigators tab and see the stories we've been doing.
Nice. All right. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, you bet.
Thank you, Marisol, for being with us. Have a good rest of your day.